Section D, radical numbers, page 6 in the worksheet. We're going to talk about radical numbers here. So this is a radical 4. Radical numbers have this square, this check symbol right here. That's called a radical symbol. The number inside of the radical symbol is called a radicand. There's different types of radicals. There's square root, there's cube root, there's fourth root, and so on. For the Algebra 1 New York State region, we're just going to talk about the square root, which would have a 2 over here, but it doesn't have a 2. It usually just has the check mark, and this means it's the square root symbol. This is the square root symbol. You'll see in like algebra 2, you see a cube root as well, but it's not going to be for this course. So square root. So what does this mean? Square root. This says right here square root of 4. So what does it mean? Square root. Square root means one number multiplied by itself equals the radicand. That's what it means. Square root. This symbol means one number multiplied by itself equals the radicand in this case, which is 4. So what number is that? People should know that. The answer is 2. Right? 2 times itself is equal to 4, the radicand in this case. So 2 times 2 is 4. Therefore, the square root of 4 is therefore 2. That's the answer. The square root of 4 is 2 because 2 multiplied by itself equals 4. In the calculator, you have, it says this check mark right here. You see that's the radical symbol. That's the square root symbol. In order to get to that, it's in blue. So you'd have to click the second button right here, which is the blue button. And then you click this, x squared. It gives you the square root symbol. You then click 4, and then you press enter, and you'll get the answer is 2 in the calculator. Square root of 9. Again, the 9 is a radicand. This is a radical symbol, so saying square root. So the square root of 9 means one number multiplied by itself is equal to 9. The answer is therefore 3. Right? 3 times itself is equal to 9. 3 times 3 is 9. The square root of 25 means one number multiplied by itself is equal to 25. That answer is 5 because 5 times 5 is equal to 25. Square root of 36 means one number multiplied by itself is equal to 36. That number is 6 because 6 times 6 is 36. Right? That's the answer. The answer is 6. Now, the square root of 16. The square root of 16 means one number multiplied by itself is equal to 16. And that would be 4. 4 times 4 is equal to 16. So the answer, the square root of 16 is 4. Now, perfect squares. Perfect squares are whole numbers whose square root results in an integer. So perfect squares are whole numbers whose square root results in an integer. Again, an integer does not have a fractional component. It does not have any numbers after the decimal point. So we just saw before, those numbers were perfect squares because we have all these numbers over here. The square root of all these numbers will result in integers, right? Radical 16 is equal to 4. Square root of 25 is 5. Square root of 16, radical means the same thing as square root, is 4. 9, radical 9, square root of 9 is 3, as you see over here. These are all perfect squares. So 1, 4, 9, 16, 25, 36, 49, these are all perfect squares. Also 121 will result in 11, and so on. If the radicand is not a perfect square, if the radicand, that means the number inside of the radical symbol, is not a perfect square, that means not one of like these numbers, for instance, then the result of the square root operation will always be an irrational number. Always. It will always be an irrational number no matter what. So for instance, radical 5. 5 is not a perfect square. It doesn't have an integer that multiplies by itself to equal 5. Therefore, the square root of 5 will always be irrational. If you go to here, second, and then x squared, you'll get the square root, put in 5, click enter, and you'll see you got a number in the calculator that says 2.2360679, so on. Remember, our irrational number are numbers that have a number after the decimal that goes on and on and on in a non-repeating pattern. Therefore, this would be irrational. Radical 20, again, is not a perfect square. 20 is not a perfect square. It does not have an integer that multiplies by itself to equal to 20. Therefore, the result of this operation will always be irrational. Therefore, radical 20, if you do it in the calculator, if you do second, and then you click x squared right here, you get the radical symbol, the square root symbol. You then put in 20, then click enter, you got 4.47. This is an irrational number. Radical 32 again, if you put it into the calculator, you'll get an irrational number. So you see, if you do a square root on a number that's not a perfect square, it does not have an integer that multiplies by itself to equal that number, the result will always be irrational. So now for section D, the way to do it in the packet, it says write the numerical value for each radical number below. After you perform the square root operation, round to the nearest hundredth. Then state if the numerical value is A, rational, or B, irrational. So C number 1 is radical 4, the square root of 4. Again, radical means could either mean square root, cube root, fourth root, but for this course we only use square root. So therefore, when they say radical, it refers to the square root. The square root of 4, you put in second and then x squared, and then you put in 4 inside of that. You then click enter, and you'll get the number 2, and the answer is 2. 2 is going to be rational. Right? Rational numbers have that after the decimal point, the numbers have either stop or they go on and on and on in a repeating patterns. Therefore, this is rational, and it's A. 231, radical 31. Again, 31 is not a perfect square, so it's going to result in an irrational number. Now, to find it in the calculator, you do second x squared, gives you the radical right here, the square root. You then put 31 in, you click enter, and you get 5.567776. Even though it stops, the calculator, it means that it keeps on going. It keeps on going until infinity. The calculator can't just show everything, so it stops it. In the calculator, in your calculator, should they say 5.5677643363? That's going to be 9 digits after the decimal point. So the calculator doesn't show until infinity, but it shows a lot, and therefore that's going to be irrational because the numbers do not have a pattern, and they go on and on and on in a non-repeating pattern. So the nearest hundredth, this is the last section. That means hundredth has 2 zeros and 100, therefore 2 numbers after the decimal point. Therefore, it's going to be 5.56. You want to round to this number right here. You then look to the number following it, the 7. If it's 5 or above, therefore this gets rounded up. And if it's less than 5, it stays the same. Basically, it rounds down to 5.56. This is 5 or up, so therefore this becomes 5.57, and that will be irrational. We're not talking about the rounded number that's rational or irrational. We're talking about radical 31, and that itself would be irrational. Radical 81 squared because it has an integer that can multiply by itself to equal to the radicand of 81. Radical 81, the square root of 81, will be 9, and that's going to be rational. The answer is rational. You do radical 225, the square root of 225, second, and then x squared, and then you put in 225, click enter, and you get 15. Put 15 in that space, and 15 is a rational number. Again, irrational means that the numbers after the decimal point go on and on and on in a non-repeating pattern. And if it doesn't do that, it's going to be rational. So this would be rational, and the answer is A on the left side. Radical 120, you do second, and then you do x squared over here. 120, there's no integer that multiplies by itself to equal to 120. So if you click enter, you'll get an irrational number. You'll get numbers after the decimal point that go on and on and on in a non-repeating pattern. Then to round it, it says 10.95445. Nearest hundredth, that means 2 numbers after the decimal point to this number right here. You then look to this number right over here. And if it's less than 5, this will be rounded down to 10.95. And the answer is 10.95, and it's B. And here are the answers to the other questions. And that's it for section D.